The mechanical ballet of naval aviation is performed on the stage of a flight deck, and this is a stage chock full of things that could kill you and a whole lot of people at the same time. That's why safety culture is so embedded in naval aviation. But even with that culture in place, things can still happen that stretch the bounds of experience. Everything from funny moments in which we will make fun of each other and our own aircrew, but nobody else better damn well do it, to dangerous moments that in hindsight actually come off rather funny because you found yourself flying through the air like Charlie Brown right after Lucy pulled away a football. Former photographer's mate, second class Christy Robinson, was attached to USS Carl Vinson's photo lab. I got to know her and the gang down there a bit when I used to hang out in the lab to keep my own lab skills sharp. She sent me these anecdotes from the 2001 to 2002 deployment and asked me to read them for her. I was a ship's company photo mate on Carl Vinson. I never did tarps, but we'd all be up on the flight deck filming now and then. During the 2001-2002 deployment, I remember one of us got in trouble for having someone sitting in one of the F-14 Tomcats because the ejection seat was still armed. The movie Behind Enemy Lines was filmed aboard ship in March of 2001. Most of the air wing was gone since we were back in port, and I had to miss meeting Gene Hackman and the other actors because I was at Fort Meade taking a class at DINFOS. The movie's international premiere was in November, a couple of months after 9/11. David Keith, one of the actors, came back to the ship while we were deployed. He wanted to do a shot in front of one of the F-14s. The F-213 was the only F-14 squadron in the air wing, and they painted the I Heart New York saying on the tails of their jets. David Keith wanted a shot in front of the tail of one of the Tomcats, and he stood in front of the one painted with 111 on its nose. I climbed up on Tomcat 111 to get a high angle of him with the sailors, but he apparently complained because he thought my boots would be in the shot. I slid down the tail end of the jet and got out of the way, although everyone was telling me I was well out of the shot and he was just being a pain. After I got down, I had a chance to meet him, and I honestly wasn't impressed very much. I'm glad he brought some interest to the ship, but working with him was not the highlight of my time on board. I do remember that Tomcat 111 flew on the afternoon we struck back. I think it was October 7th. It was carrying the TARPS pod, and it got the aerial photos the intel people used to create target maps and stuff like that. I remember it because I was the photog assigned to photograph that launch, and I was talking to the VF-213 guys about the mission. I really didn't interact with the planes much since I wasn't in the air wing, but those are a couple of memories I recall around the Tomcats. Like all professional photographers, I have my own personal top 10 list, the top 10 greatest photos I've ever taken. Interestingly, in that top 10 list, 5 of them never change. They are just permanently there. I've never got anything better than those. The other 5 kind of keep shifting as I go forward in my life and career, even to this day, still taking photos. The greatest photo I ever took of an F-14 is in that top 10 list. It is, and it usually, when I look at my top 10 photos ever, it usually seems to fall into number 2 or number 3. It's a gorgeous Classic shot of one of our Tomcats silhouetted against the sunset with one Airedale reaching in the cockpit, starting to get it ready for flight ops that night. I photographed it in November of 2001, and that aircraft actually is Bureau number 161159. The aircraft in this photo that I took is on display here in Pensacola at the museum. I almost didn't get that shot. We had just finished a FOD walkdown. Now, foreign object damage, or FOD, is a critical consideration on a flight deck, flight line, military, civilian, it doesn't matter. Jet engines can suck up debris, and if that debris goes to the jet engine, it tears it apart. Jet wash can blow debris into other engines, into people, cause damage, cause injury. So on the flight line and flight deck, we do regular FOD walkdowns twice a day to clean the deck. We were finishing an evening FOD walkdown when I happened to look over and see that scene. I almost didn't take that photo, but I went ahead and grabbed it because it was a cool scene and it might fit an assignment I was working on. Our executive officer at the time, Commander Anthony Gaiani, call sign Gandhi, decided that he wanted to do something to recognize everybody in the squadron that had been there since Operation Enduring Freedom, well, since 9/11. He was going to take over as CO in December, and there'll be a regularly scheduled change of command. But he started this as XO, and what he was going to do was create a certificate that he could give to everybody who'd been in the squadron on 9/11. He took a pack of high-quality printer paper in his jet and flew it on a combat mission over Afghanistan. So the certificates that the admin guys designed for him are printed on paper that flew in a combat mission. Our traditional photo that went with awards is one of our jets in the air, beautiful aircraft, landscape below it, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted something special for this occasion, but he also wanted something that wouldn't highlight one person or another. Wasn't sure what he wanted beyond that. So he came and talked to us in the tarp shop, and since I'm the guy that was always taking pictures, I got the commission. All I could say at that point was I'm looking for something that showcases everybody. This is a common thing when you're in photography or graphic art. Somebody tells you, I've got this idea for this, but it's kind of vague. That's just how it works in this business. For the next couple of months, when I wasn't working on the jets, I was taking photos of our jets. He said he wanted people around the jets, but I also made a point of shooting images that didn't have a lot of people around the aircraft. I wanted to be able to show him a variety of options to help him narrow down what he was looking for. But a little bit into it is when that sunset shot happened, the one I'm so proud of. And I figured it wasn't what he wanted because it only had the one Airedale, but I was going to show it to him anyway, just in case. And although that wasn't the image he wanted, that was the one that springboarded him into, this is what I'm looking for. I want a lot of people around the jet. I want officer enlisted, but I want them silhouetted. So with that mandate and that now very specific instruction, I went out and blasted off a bunch of images the next few days and got the image that he was looking for. It is a damn good image I'm very proud of. He presented these during an awards ceremony and recognition ceremony on the ship in early 2002, and he was commanding officer by this point. And it's funny because as he hands me my blue folder with the certificate and the photograph in it, he had to laugh because he says, "Here, I'm handing you your own photo. I know you already have a copy of it." It was a funny moment, but it was a fun assignment to work, and it gave me probably one of the greatest backstories I could ever have for any photo I ever took. Good morning. Today is September 10th, 2025. This addendum to the photo finish chapter is not about 9/11. I will be doing a documentary about 9/11 and the early days of Operation Enduring Freedom next year for the 25th anniversary. This just happens to be coincidence, assuming there are coincidences. In 2001, I asked Commander King, our commanding officer at the time, to fly a flag for me over the battlefield with him. My brother had sent me that flag. When I deployed with 213, I meant to bring an American flag with me just because it's my first deployment. I'm patriotic. I wanted to have an American flag. I forgot to. So I emailed my brother, hey, can you send me a flag? He sent me a flag and felt good. I had a flag with me. Then 9/11 happens. That's the flag I asked Commander King to fly with him. And he flew it, gave me a certificate to certify that that flag had gone with him. I cannot say I was the first Black Lion to ask any of our aircrew to do that. What I can say is I was at least one of the first. Because after the skipper did that for me and I was told my shipmates about it, was a veritable explosion of people saying, "Oh, you can do that. That's a great idea," and asking everybody that got in those pointy nose jets and went off the pointy end of the ship to fly something for them. It's a way of connecting with our aircrew and at least symbolically being with them while they're in combat getting shot at. A way of feeling connected to, even more connected to these world shaping events we're now part of and we're making happen. I was home on leave in 2002 after leaving the Black Lions before I transferred to shore duty on Guam, and I had that flag and certificate with me because I wanted to show mom and dad. Well, my dad suggested I leave it with him there in Niceville because my sister in law had had a flag flown with some Air Force units because my father's retired Air Force. She had had a flag flown with some Air Force units over the battlefield for him. And he said, just leave the flag and certificate with him because he was going to get his put in a shadow box. And he said he would do mine at the same time. And it would be my Christmas gift. I was like, great. Left it with mom and dad. I get to Guam. Shortly thereafter, life started whacking our family hard. My father's from Hawaii. In fact, my brother and I are the first in our family in 3 or 4 generations that were not born in the islands in almost 100 years. So for many years, Pop was flying back and forth to Hawaii once or twice a year to take care of the family, help out, and just be with them in their last years. That flag and certificate were forgotten. In fact, in the intervening 23 years here, I thought that they had just gotten lost in one of my Navy moves. Monday passed, September 8th, 2 days ago. I was home in Niceville, watching NASCAR with Pop. If we don't get together for the races live, he'll record them, and I'll go over and we'll watch the races together, hanging out with mom and just chit chatting. Pop says, "Hey, come to my workroom. I got something for you, and you are not going to believe it." So we go to his workroom, pulls out a big flat box, opens it, and there's the flag my sister-in-law had flown for him. And he pulled out the flag my brother had sent me that Commander King had flown over the battlefield, and the certificate that Commander King had done. These are the items that, if not started that sequence of events that led me to get the greatest F-14 photo I ever took, they were at least part of the start of that sequence of events. Like I said, I can't tell you if I was the first to make that request of our aircrew, but I was one of the first. So I was there when that sequence of events lit off that eventually led to me getting that beautiful sunset photo of Triple Sticks. Well, at the time she was Triple Sticks. Now she is nose number 204, and she is here in the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, a few miles from my house. I swear that aircraft is stalking me, and I will explain more about that in episode 4, The Fate of Lions. My father points out on the certificate, he says, take a look at what aircraft your commanding officer was flying when he took that flag up for you. Triple Sticks. Currently nose number 204, same aircraft. Bureau number 161159. That is her official serial number. The aircraft I got the greatest F-14 photo I ever took of. The sequence of events that resulted in me getting that photo of that aircraft began with that aircraft. The timing of Pop finding this right before this whole documentary is done, it's in the can. I have everything uploaded to YouTube and to Rumble. They're preset to drop on the proper dates. And then this happens. Pop surprises me with this, so I need to pull down episode 3 and do an addendum. Don't ever underestimate even the smallest things you do for yourself or for others. You never know the impact you're going to have on people or the world, or how echoes of that might one day come back to you. Thank you for your time. I now return you to your regularly scheduled episode of Black Lions. Photographer's Mate First Class John Gornflow was my leading petty officer while I was attached to VF-213's Tarps and Lantern Shop. He and I shared numerous adventures on the roof together, but he was closer to a few incidents than I was, so I'd rather you hear his recollections. Additionally, his take on another adventure we had was just funnier than mine, so I thought I'd share that one. He sent me these recollections and asked me to read them for him. Our flight deck became a resting place for more than a few thousand dragonflies one day. They were everywhere. I guess they were on a long-distance overwater flight and needed a rest. The flight deck looked like something out of a biblical plague, but this didn't stop flight ops from starting up, of course. However, it did create one of the most bizarre situations I ever experienced aboard ship. The insects were flying about, crawling on the jets, crawling over us. Now, the flight deck itself gets pretty hot even when the aircraft aren't turning, and we could smell the roasting of the dragonflies that were unlucky enough to have landed on the deck itself. Although we were covered from head to foot in our safety gear, there's still kind of an ugh factor from having so many dragonflies on us, and smelling them cook if they landed on the deck. However, once the jets all started their engines for the morning's first launches, the plague came to a very abrupt end. That really was a surreal day. Within barely a few minutes of 60-something aircraft starting their engines, there was not one single dragonfly left alive. But we still had to walk over the carcasses fried to the deck for a while. The Great Dragonfly Massacre is not to be forgotten. Later in the deployment, I was working on an aircraft on Carl Vinson's starboard side while John was on working a Tomcat on the port side. I happened to glance over, and right when I did, that aircraft's starboard engine seemed to explode, then die a rather painful death sputtering out smoke. I saw John and couldn't tell if he was laughing or yelling, but it was obvious the engine had sucked up something and suffered a FOD event. John relayed his memory of being right there beside that aircraft when the engine shredded. Newsflash, he wasn't laughing. Another day, I was on the starboard side of the ship during startup. I think you, Sparky, were on the port side working on another aircraft. Shortly after the engine started, a screw that had fallen out of one of the AT's panels was sucked up into the jet's starboard engine. The engine pretty much just blew up. Massive fireball, big explosion, scared the shit out of everyone. I began cursing because I was both scared out of my wits for a moment and really pissed off that someone had neglected to ensure their work area was FOD-free before we started the engines. Remember, this was during Operation Enduring Freedom, so the Air Wing is flying combat missions, and now we have an F-14 that not only can't fly, but it's blocking part of the flight deck while the crash trucks were there, just in case. Chief Fraser seemed to kind of pop up out of nowhere and got things under control so fast it was amazing. He had a talent for calming people down, and I really appreciated it that day. In fact, he got everything and everyone calmed down so fast that we started moving the aircrew and ordnance to the backup jet just as smoothly as if we were getting things ready before flight ops started, instead of dodging and ducking around other aircraft moving to the catapults. Lloyd's of London, which is one of the top insurance markets in the world, ranks the flight deck of an American aircraft carrier as one of the most dangerous places to work. Makes sense. We have aircraft moving around, each of which weighs thousands of pounds. Those aircraft either have spinning props or jet engines, both of which can suck up and shred a human being in mere seconds, both of which actually put out a propeller wash or a jet wash that can blast people and equipment around the deck like rag dolls and toys. We have explosive ordnance, which is designed to go boom and blow things up in the bad guy's backyard, but if mishandled can go boom and blow things up right in our faces. We have flammable materials all over the place. And that's just on the flight deck. Our air crew also face a great deal of danger in the air operating these high-performance machines. We don't really think about things like that because very rarely do incidents happen to the jets when they're at altitude flying. Most aircraft accidents, military or civilian, happen during takeoff and landing, which makes sense because that's when an aircraft is at its most vulnerable. But I got a good lesson back in May of 2001 during JTFX, our final workup exercise before deployment. One of our jets, aircraft nose number 111, bureau number 161159, landed on deck with her refueling probe still deployed. The panel, the door covering, the panel that covered the probe when it was retracted was broken in half, and there was a hole punched in the canopy. The pilot had misjudged their approach to the refueling aircraft's basket that's hanging down on that long hose, and instead of engaging the probe into the basket, had ended up hitting the basket with the refueling probe door, shattering the door, and punching a piece of debris through the canopy. It's easy to laugh at that and talk about, ooh, look at that air crew. But the fact is, this is a jet. that is designed to make quick maneuvers with the most minimal of input in combat situations. It is flying at hundreds of miles an hour, coming up behind another aircraft flying hundreds of miles an hour, both of which are moving in 3 dimensions in a fluid, and air is a fluid. That fluid is never still. When you think about all the variables that a pilot has to keep under control in order to keep their aircraft under control, it really is a wonder that we're able to fly, and fly as well as we do. Bird strikes are the most common animal strike we know and we hear about all the time, and it makes sense. Aircraft are flying, birds are flying. 2 objects trying to occupy the same space at the same time doesn't exactly work, and tonnage usually wins. But what about aircraft hitting animals on the deck? Roadkill doesn't just happen on the highways. Following deployment back at Oceana, it was the 3rd of May 2002. I was working night check. We had a few jets that were going to go up and do some night training, so we get them spun up. They taxi off, we clean up the flight deck, and then we head back in the hangar when we get word that one of them is coming back immediately. It had struck a deer on the runway. Lion 102 was on the takeoff roll when a deer, just like you'd see in the highway, a deer jumped out in front of the jet and got run over. The deer, of course, did not survive. From the pieces that we found, we were able to determine it was a rather young deer, and that is what kept this very nasty incident from turning tragic. The deer was clearly young, both from the coloring and the size. Had the deer been an adult, it would have been tall enough that when the jet hit it, because the jet was still on the ground during the takeoff run, most of the deer's body would have gone down the starboard engine, been ingested, and destroyed the engine. The aircraft was in the single most vulnerable point it could possibly be in prior to its wheels leaving the ground. Had that deer gone down that engine, destroyed that engine, the jet would have been moving 100 miles an hour, actually more than that, but suddenly on 2 engines, one engine suddenly goes out, which means that all the thrust is coming from the port side, which will cause the jet to want to yaw to starboard very hard while still on the ground. That could easily have turned into a crash that at the very least would have required our aircrew to eject while they're still on the ground, and ejecting from an aircraft is not an easy thing. Or at worst, they would have been caught up in a crash and possibly injured or killed. So the fact that this deer was small enough that it got rolled under the jet instead of going through the engine possibly saved the lives of the aircrew. Unfortunately, we now had one hell of a mess to clean up. Having to get near it to photograph it definitely was not one of the better smells of my career. On the flight line, or especially on the flight deck, you can be doing everything right and still get blasted across the deck like a leaf. And yes, I'm speaking from experience. During JTFX, our final workup exercise, I was flight deck qualified. I'd been up there for months. I've been working. I could be up there by myself. I was CDI qualified. So we would go to the flight deck, leave our shop, and go up along to the catwalk on the starboard side between the forward elevators to come up on the roof. When you come up on the roof, if there's no flight ops going, you just look overhead to make sure you're not going to walk up and smack your head into something. But if you come up during flight ops, you've got all your gear on, your cranial on, and you poke your head up to make sure nobody's got a jet engine or something blasting right at you. Well, I poked my head up this day. I looked around. Everything was fine. They were starting to move aircraft on the aft end of the ship toward the waste catapults, the ones that are on the landing area. The bow, everything was still quiet. So I hop up on the deck and walk forward, and there's an EA-6B Prowler halfway down the ship, far away from me. Most jets or horizontal, and you'll see flight deck guys and gals duck to run under the jet's exhaust so they can get across the flight deck but not be hit. The A6 Intruders and the later EA-6B Prowlers, their engines were angled down, so their exhaust pointed at the deck. They were also very loud, one of the loudest aircraft we had around there during my day, and very powerful. This Prowler was over halfway down the ship away from me. That Prowler was facing to port, and as I started walking forward, my direction of movement was mostly forward, away from it. As that Prowler, it was facing port, and when they started directing it to move to, I think it was heading to Catapult 3, maybe 4, but one of the waste catapults, it turned aft to circle around and head toward the catapult. And as it was turning, and its exhaust was pointing forward down the flight deck, I actually heard the pilot goose it, and I wasn't thinking anything of it. I figured he just needed a little more power to keep the thing moving. And that jet blast went all the way down the flight deck and hit me and knocked me end over end. I swear I went tumbling head over heels through the air, just like Charlie Brown would every time Lucy would yank away that stupid football.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!
Much more frightening and dangerous incident happened to me during deployment. The 1MC is what we call the PA circuit that is down inside the skin of the ship, and all ships have a 1MC. However, the 5MC is the PA system we use on the flight deck, and it's a very loud system because the air boss or whoever else is talking to us over the 5MC is trying to talk to us over all the jet noise through our cranials.
On the bow, stand clear. 736 lifting for plane guard.
There are designated landing spots for the helicopters on the flight deck. They're not obvious to the casual observer, but we know where they are and we know how to look for them. And the air boss will normally say helo landing spot 1, spot 3, spot 5. That way we know where the helicopter is going to be landing so we're not there. This was evening. Toward the end of the day, it was getting dark. Elevator 3 had been lowered. I was walking by elevator 3. It was lowered. And there's a little, when it lowers, there is a little set of hydraulic stanchions that come up, and they have a cable strung between them. It's more of a visual aid than an actual safety barrier because it's very small. We had a helo ops going on in the flight, and the air boss had called out helo landing spot 1 earlier, helo landing spot 3. Those helos had landed, taken off, and flown on, and no word. Okay, no big deal. Helo's not landing. And I'm walking, and all of a sudden I hit this downdraft hits me and starts buffeting me, and I look up. I'm standing next to spot 5. The helo is coming down on spot 5. The air boss never called out where the helo was landing, much less that we had another helo landing. So as I'm looking up and realizing there's a helo coming down toward me, the downwash really hits me and starts sliding me. I've got my flight deck boots on, but we've been deployed for months. The flight deck is getting worn. It's covered in salt spray and grime. The non-skid has eroded down. I'm sliding backwards. Even though I'm braced forward, I'm still sliding as this helo gets lower. That's when I remembered elevator 3 right behind me is down. And there's only one thing you can do in those situations. That's just drop to a knee, grab a pad eye, and hold on for dear life. I was expecting to get yelled at.
Two of your snot-nosed jockeys did a flyby on my tower at over 400 knots. I want somebody's butt. I want it now. I've had it. God damn it! That's twice. I want some butts.
I was expecting the air boss to call me up to the tower to scream at me for being under a helo when it's landing, and my only defense would be, sir, you never called out a spot. Of course, that's not going to be a defense because the air boss is a captain and I was a little second-class petty officer. Nobody said anything. Literally, nobody said anything. It's like nobody actually noticed I was there. And the reason I say it was like that is probably because nobody noticed I was there. Everybody's focusing on the helicopter. Nobody knows there's a guy sliding below it. Even when we all have our heads on swivels, things can happen, and things can happen to people around us that we don't notice are happening. Spoken a few times about the dangers of an engine getting FOD'd out. And again, FOD is an acronym for foreign object damage. So anything from a rock to a piece of metal to a bird to a person gets ingested into an engine. There's a number of FOD incidents on the deck that happen to all our aircraft. It happens no matter how much you work on keeping the deck clean. This is an industrial environment where things are happening, especially during wartime. This was another story that happened at Catapult 3, the waste catapult. One of our Tomcats had pulled up there, got on the catapult, kneeled, got locked in the bridle. We're sitting there waiting for that awesome moment when the jet roars and flies and we get that adrenaline thrill. The engine didn't explode in some epic Hollywood blast, but the engine exploded. a massively huge fireball goes blasting out the back of the engine. And this was the port side engine. Oh, excuse me, starboard side engine, the one nearest me. Massive fireball goes blasting out the back of the engine. Now remember, the engine is sucking things through one way. So massive fireball going out the back of the engine makes sense. Except the massive fireball also spat out the front of the engine, out the intake going forward. Crash trucks jump into action and come into place because we just had an engine blow up. Investigation determined that the starboard engine had not ingested any foreign object. It had ingested itself. There's several stages of fan blades in a jet engine. One of the fan blades toward further back, second, third, fourth stage, I don't remember where, but it was one of the ones further back, had cracked. And a piece of it went through the engine, which basically tore the engine apart and caused it to explode, hence why it blew out the back and the front. And that is a very rare occurrence because the inspections these engines go through, these aircraft go through, it's not just us opening panels and looking at things. There are all kinds of equipment we can use to do non-destructive inspections, NDIs. It's like something out of Star Trek when you start learning on it, so you can actually kind of see the structure of the structure.
I would say what sets NDI apart from other aircraft maintainers is we can do a more thorough inspection of either surface, subsurface defects that may be hidden using various scientific methods. We are able to detect corrosion, cracks, anything that could put the jet out of service. Then we can make those recommendations to get that fixed or have an engineer look at what they want to do with that aircraft.
Because of those kind of in-depth inspections, engines pulling a number like this are incredibly rare across the Navy. In fact, my whole aviation career, all the way back to P3s and EP3s when I was a yeoman, much less working on F-14s, that was the only engine I ever saw that foughted itself out because it failed inside. Every other engine I saw that got foughted out and damaged was because there's something on the deck that had ingested an actual foreign object. I am the only Sparky in the Navy you'll probably ever meet who did not get the name from electrocuting himself. Back at VQ2, my first command, I hung out with the maintainers all the time, and maintainers are very much the nickname sort. I'm a huge Scooby-Doo fan, classic Scooby-Doo. The guys at VQ2 started calling me Sparky Dooby-Doo. And then they started coming up with all kinds of variations. And by the time I left VQ2, I was Sparky. Sparkiopolis, the Greek version, and frankly my favorite. El Sparkito, Sparkinator, Sparknuts, Sparkplug, Sparks. So I'm the only Sparky you will ever meet who did not get it by electrocuting himself. There were 3 other Sparkies on that flight deck during that deployment, 1 enlisted, 2 officer, and I met them all, talked to them all, and found out all 3 of them got their Sparky by electrocuting themselves. That doesn't mean I'm immune to having been electrocuted. When you plug power into an aircraft, be it on shore or on the ship, we're talking external power, you don't just get this big extension cord, plug it in, and turn on the aircraft. The power these aircraft need they need a lot of power. If that power hits a human, it's going to kill us. Be it on shore or on the ship, when you pull the cord out of the power box, you pull the cord out and you plug it into the jet. It's a 2-person job, has to be. It's designed for safety. Once it's plugged in the jet, the guy at the jet then reaches up and hits a button, an interlock. Once that button's hit, he has to hold it while signaling to the other sailor at the power box. That sailor then turns on the power. Now the power is flowing, and that interlock will stay in place. If power is dropped, that interlock opens, and the aircraft cannot be repowered until you manually push that interlock back into place. It's also required that if a power box is malfunctioning, it has to be tagged out with a tag that physically locks the mechanism so you cannot move it, and a big red tag saying, non-functional. We were in front of elevator 3, between elevator 3 and the island. It was about 11 in the morning. It was an overcast morning this day, which is really unusual for the Arabian Sea, but it happens. I grabbed the cord, and it was either Bill Biscuit, or Will Huff, one of those two. They were at the power box in the catwalk. So I pull the cord over the jet, plug it in, and next thing I know, I'm flying backwards in a shower of sparks that just looks like something blew up. Because something blew up. The power in that power box was non-functional. It was broken. But the flight deck guys, the ship's company, had not tagged it out. So we didn't know we weren't supposed to touch it. So when I pulled the cord and stuck it in the aircraft, there was already live power. It was already hot. So when it hit the aircraft and its connections, it's the plug hits the the plugs on the aircraft, all that power just was let loose. What little hair I had, since I had such a short haircut, I could feel that hair stand straight out. I felt the hair on my arms under my jersey stand straight out. And I realized I was also moving. It wasn't until I hit the deck that I realized I'd been blasted backwards. And that's one reason I don't really remember whether it was Bill Bissonnet or Will Huff, because I was so scrambled. They came running up. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think, what the hell happened?" Well, a couple of people had seen the shower of sparks blast out from under the jet and came running, one of whom was one of the ship's company, a yellow shirt. Like, "What the hell happened?" He puts a call in on his radio to flight deck control, tells them what power box, what just happened. Yeah, they called back that power box had been inspected the night before and found to be broken because the on-off switch on the box was stuck in the on position. The lever itself was broken, so you could put the lever into off, but the contact was still closed. So the circuit was still closed and therefore providing power. Somebody in the ship's air department had just not bothered to tag it out. I had to go to medical and get checked over real quick because I had just taken quite a jolt. Everybody was now teasing me that, hey, you finally earned Sparky by getting electrocuted. And that aircraft had to go to the hangar bay for an inspection because what just happened could potentially have shorted out a lot of the avionics. Thank God it wasn't. We got her back on the deck in a couple of days. One person's small mistake, forgetting to put a tag on an electrical box, had that whole chain of events. And although I still got my nickname Sparky from a cartoon dog, I have experienced being a Sparky in real life. I'm an unusual Airedale. I have never seen a crash or a crunch in real life. And a crunch is what we call it when an aircraft hits something while moving on deck. I've seen plenty of near misses. I have seen aircraft and tow tractors start sliding across the deck even though the brakes were set because the deck was so slick. I've seen aircraft nearly bump into other aircraft. I've seen people trip. I've been one of those people who tripped, and I will tell you that story shortly. But despite the inherent danger of a flight line or a flight deck, in a lot of ways, naval aviation is not a safe place to work, but things don't happen as much as you might expect. If you think about the millions of aircraft launches and recoveries that happen aboard ship and shore every day around the world, if you think about the millions of movements done by ground equipment and sailors aboard ship and and on shore every day in naval aviation, mishaps and incidents are remarkably few because that safety culture is embedded. Things, however, do happen and can happen to those of us even when we have our head on that proverbial swivel. It's not a safe place to work, but as long as that safety culture is maintained and everybody keeps their head on the swivel, most of the time we come back with great sea stories and a lot of, "Oh man, that was a near miss," but not in, "Crap, we lost somebody." Photographer's Mate First Class John Gornflow remained the leading petty officer, or LPO, of the VF-213 Tarps and Lantern Shop during the Tomcat's final deployments. While underway aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN-71, he and the other Black Lions experienced a rather terrifying event that could have resulted in the death of a shipmate, but fortunately only resulted in significant injuries. There was a scary damn day I remember on the Roosevelt. We had a guy hurrying across the deck and he ran right through the exhaust of a start cart, what we often called a huffer. Start cart was a small jet engine, so its exhaust was dangerous and powerful. The guy was running and just sprinted straight into that exhaust flow. The jet blast of the thing blew him over the port aft side of the flight deck. A bunch of us jumped forward to grab him, but he was slippery with sweat and we couldn't hold on. He fell about 60 feet down to the ocean. His float code activated and kept his head above water, but the impact caused the sound attenuators, the ear cups on his cranial, to be violently jerked upwards. That upward jerk damn near cut off one of his ears. His ear was hanging on by a thread and his head was bloody as hell. He was medevaced from the ship, And I used that moment to give my guys a stern reminder about keeping their head on a swivel. I told them the last thing I wanted was to have to write their families and tell them one of my sailors was killed because they were careless. Despite the danger and all the drama, the flight deck is also a very funny place to work sometimes. It could be the ship being smited with a biblical plague of dragonflies, at least until those dragonflies are smited by all the aircraft engines turning on and removing them from the rest of their existence. Other times it can be the comedy of your float coat inflating on its own. Now, this is the float coat from USS Ponce, LPD-15. You will hear about her. She was known as the Proud Lion. I will be telling you about her in the final episode of this documentary, The Fate of Lions. Yes, USS Ponce, an amphibious assault ship, has an integral part in the story, in my story of F-14 Tomcats. I got to keep my float coat because the ship in 2012 was decomming, so they were getting rid of all the equipment. But again, you'll hear about that next episode. Aboard the Ponce, I wore a white float coat, white jersey, and white cranial when we were doing flight ops. Most carriers and large deck amphibious assault ships will have media personnel wear green jerseys and float coats. Smaller decks like Ponce will sometimes have them in white. Of course, when I was aboard Carl Vinson back in the day working on F-14s, I wore a green float coat and green jersey. Float coat is our basic piece of survival equipment if we, God forbid, go overboard and land in the water. It has an oral inflation tube so you can blow up the air bladder inside it manually. But the primary piece of equipment that's likely going to save our lives is a water-activated CO2 inflation device. There is a lanyard on here so you can yank it and activate it manually if you need to, but it's designed to go off when this thing hits the water because the CO2 cartridge is punctured by a spring. That spring is held in tension by a water-soluble tablet. Now, you can break the tablet by using the manual lanyard, but it's designed to release the spring when it dissolves in water. That's an important piece of equipment because if you fall off a flight deck, when you hit the water, very likely you're going to be knocked out for a minute. So having it automatically inflate is a very critical piece of life-saving equipment. Float coat also contains a pocket with a emergency beacon light and emergency whistle. And finally, there is a dye marker, which will spread a huge bright greenish yellow stain in the water around us, significantly increasing our visibility to rescuers. So this is the float coat that we wear. Now, please note a small detail. The water-activated CO2 inflation device, the spring is held in tension by a water-soluble tablet. Please note, I did not say it was soluble in only liquid water. First saw this happen when we were approaching Thailand in mid-August of 2001. And it proceeded to happen a great deal while we were in Thailand, the Strait of Malacca, the Arabian Sea, where it was extremely hot and very humid, meaning there is a great deal of water dissolved in the atmosphere. We were prepping the jet. It was morning time. Aircrew hadn't come up from the ready room yet. So we're prepping the jet. So we're doing our pre-flight maintenance, not the pre-flight startup sequence. All of a sudden, there was just this sound of... So I turn around to look, and there is a green Pillsbury Doughboy standing by the nose of the aircraft. His arms stuck out like this because his float coat had inflated. The humidity level had dissolved that little locking tablet that allowed the automatic inflation device to activate, so his float coat, and he looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy or a green version of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters waddling around. You're not going to get below like that because your float coat is inflated and you're about twice your normal girth now. So he had to deflate the float coat, hand off his job to somebody else, and head down below to get the float coat replaced. Because once it goes off, you have to get it. That cartridge has to get replaced. The float coat's got to get reset, inspected. Didn't think anything of it. It was just kind of a freak thing as we were nearing Thailand. It's getting so humid. I'm like, yeah, that was funny. I guess it could happen. Then it happened again and again. Not just our squadron. We're sitting there working on our aircraft, and they tended to spot our Tomcats toward the aft end of Carl Vinson. Usually we were spotted and parked on the fantail of the ship, largely because the aircraft were so big. It was easier to put them in the back and the smaller aircraft up forward, like the Lawn Darts. F-18s. So we're sitting there working, and out of the corner of your eye, you just see suddenly this burst of color, and you look over, and there's somebody in a red jersey or green jersey or brown jersey with that flow code just having inflated. The most comedic time it happened is we're in the middle of a pre-flight, and then one of the yellow shirts who's directing the aircraft, their flow code goes off. Aircrew, they hit the brakes. Yellow shirts switch out. That guy gets below. New guy takes over and moves the aircraft. But it's just funny because out of the corner of your eye, you just see these bursts of color just plop, plop, pop, as flow codes would occasionally spontaneously inflate. I never had that happen to me because I saw it happen by the second or third, maybe the fourth time I saw it happen. I realized I was as susceptible to that danger as anybody else. So I made a habit of at least once a week changing out that water-soluble tablet in my water-activated inflation device because I had absolutely no desire to end up looking like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man waddling across the flight deck of USS Carl Vinson. I played Superman one night on the flight deck. Bet you didn't know that. In fact, my take on Superman was almost as good as Christopher Reeve. My flying technique, perfect. It was my landing that needed some work. Myself and my buddy Will Huff were working one of the jets, and this was just before the aircrew came up from the ready room. My team, my TARPS guys, were moving a lantern pod and putting the lantern pod in place under Weapon Station 8 under the right wing. Will Huff was there with some of the airframers doing their thing. And right as we got the lantern pod into place, just got it up there, got the bolts through it, secured it on there, and me as the CDI watched my guys use the torque wrench and torque those bolts to the right foot-pounds. As soon as it got secured, before we realized what's going on, the cradle that holds that pod up there just dropped. Big old metallic clang as it falls into itself. Look down, and there's hydraulic fluid all over the deck and all over our boats. The skid's hydraulic system had ruptured. Good news. Like I said, the pod was already secured to the aircraft. So when the skid dropped, pod wasn't going anywhere. But now we have a broken skid. These skids have one hydraulic system. That's it. That hydraulic system operates the lift mechanisms and the movement, so you can lift up, move the cradle back and forth a little bit. That hydraulic system is also what unlocks the brakes. These brakes have a very powerful spring system, so when you release the brake handle, the brakes lock, and these skids can stay in place, holding thousands of pounds without rolling. But when you pull that lever to release the brakes, hydraulic fluid helped release that spring, helped push that spring back so the brakes opened up. So when the hydraulic fluid was gone, there's no way to get those brakes to unlock. So we now have a couple 100-pound skid stuck under an airplane, under its wing, but under the airplane on a flight deck in a puddle of hydraulic fluid with flight ops about to start. I got to start thinking really fast. I go over and talk to Chief Frazier, our flight deck coordinator, and find out that elevator number 1, the elevator all the way at the farthest forward end of the flight deck, is going to be dropped in a few minutes to move some equipment. If I can get this skid to that elevator, we can get it to the hangar bay, turn it over to the ship's company people who do the ground equipment, and we'll get a new skid in return. But me and my guys have got to move a several 100-pound skid about almost 1,000 feet across non-skid around working aircraft and people with no working wheels. We have to drag it. So I tell my guys, my airmen, start hauling it. There's no easy way to do this. Just start hauling it, get to elevator number 1, get on that elevator before it drops. We're getting down to the wire before the launch cycle starts. So I turn to Will Huff and ask him just to tell everybody I will be back before things get moving. Fortunately, VF-213 was actually at the tail end of the launch cycle. So I still had a few minutes before our aircrew were even going to start engines, much less need our help with the lantern pods. I turn and I start doing exactly what you're never supposed to do on the flight deck. Running. I know you see it in the movies. People go to general quarters, everybody's running. You never run going to general quarters or across the flight deck because you have too many people and too many things moving and too confined to space. You walk quickly, you jog, but you never flat out run, and you especially don't run without looking where the hell you're going. I take off running. I got 1 step, 2 steps, 3, and I am flying like Superman. Arms are forward, my body is horizontal to the deck, and that's where the Superman illustration and analogy ends, because gravity quickly took over, and like a sperm whale dropping from a couple of miles up in the sky, I then did a perfect belly flop right on the flight deck. Bam! Will Huff, a couple of the guys come over. Sparky, are you okay? What the hell happened? I'm getting up and I'm just winded because I just did a complete belly flop from an altitude of about 5 feet straight down onto steel. My right ankle is killing me. I mean, I'm holding my foot. I'm kind of hopping on one foot. My right knee is killing me because when I belly flop, my right knee hit the deck just ahead of the rest of me. I'm like, what the hell happened? I turn around and realize Will Huff is laughing and he's pointing at the deck behind me. Our F-14 was spotted on the fantail. Just to its right, on the very starboard side of the fantail, was an F-18 that had been spotted there. Where that F-18 was, one of the chains that was used, the chain on the nose gear, the nearest pad eye to that chain wasn't directly into the nose gear, because normally we'll chain the aircraft as vertically as possible. This chain was almost horizontal, going about 4 feet to the nearest pad eye, which was about 4 feet over here. That's what caught my right ankle, because that's what I didn't see since I turned to go flat out running in my haste to help my airmen. Everybody made sure I was okay. Will was laughing, and once I realized that what he was pointing at and what I had done, he let me have it. I mean, he was making fun of me to no end. Everybody was laughing at me. Even guys and gals in other squadrons were pointing. Trust me, you notice these things when you are the object of the entire flight deck's ridicule. So kind of limping because my ankle's hurting. Not bad. I'm going to walk it off. I get up there and help the guys. We get the skid on the elevator just in time. Later that night, Will Huff found me on the mess decks when I was eating, and he was actually very apologetic. He told me I should not have made fun of you like that. You could have gotten hurt. I said, Will, first off, you didn't make fun of me until after we all knew I wasn't hurt. He said, yeah, but I shouldn't have made fun of you like that. You know, you made a mistake. I said, Will, I deserved it. I broke the cardinal rule of flight deck life. But for just a moment, I was playing Superman so perfectly. And then reality set in, and I wasn't Superman. I was a sperm whale dropped from a couple of miles up, smacking into the ground. The only thing missing was the bowl of petunias.
Curiously, the only thing that went through the mind of the bowl of petunias as it fell was, oh no, not again.
Life on the flight deck or flight line is rather irreverent, and there are rivalries and nicknames, just like in the sporting world or anything else. I'm honestly not sure what a lot of people call the Tomcats that weren't in our squadron. We call them the Tomcats, the Cats, the Jets. We referred to the S-3 Vikings as Hoovers because they had those big old giant engines that hung down off the wing. When those things started up, when the S-3 Vikings started up, it really sounded like an overticked Hoover vacuum cleaner signing up. The C-2 Greyhound cargo plane we refer to simply as the COD because its mission is Carrier Onboard Delivery, COD. We also occasionally refer to it as cash on delivery when parts were coming in. The F-18s were lawn darts. And that's because we had these nice, big, beefy, meaty, robust F-14s, and those Hornets were narrow little darts. And of course, we ridicule and make fun of each other. I got laughed at by the whole damn flight deck when I tripped and ended up looking like a whale crashing out of the sky. But that was a rare one. Usually ridicule and that kind of banter was reserved only for our own. We may make fun of our air crew and our fellow maintainers in VF 213 for their foibles, but if anybody from another squadron or from the ship dares to say anything about them, ooh, it's on. We're allowed to do it, but you better not do it. And it worked the other way too. We better not at least let them catch us saying anything about their people. November 2nd, 2001. It's during Operation Enduring Freedom. Lion 100 is coming back for the 1500 recovery. And this is one of those things I had written down in an email telling people the story, so I've got a written record of this. You have 4 wires, aft to forward. The number 3 wire is the sweet spot. That is the wire air crew or pilots are aiming for, no matter what their aircraft, except for the helos. The helos are looking for the spots. It's really not good as an air crewman in the ready room if you miss all 4 wires, especially if you do it a couple of times in a row. Lion 100 was coming back in. I was standing on the starboard aft end of the ship with my buddy Will Huff, airframer I've mentioned him before. Here comes Lion 100. Will and I both realized she was going long. The aircraft was way too high. She was long. Tailhook hits the deck, aircraft hits the deck and takes back off. Lion 100 missed all 4 wires, hits the landing area, takes back off and circles around. Will and I look at each other. We know, yep, he's going to hear about it tonight in the ready room. Yeah, their aircraft land. Lion 100 comes back in. It's turn again. She's coming down. Lion 100 comes down and misses all 4 wires a second time. Takes off, flies around. More aircraft start landing in the interim. And I looked at Will. I said, do you think somebody should remind him that the resting wire is over here? And Will says, yeah, somebody needs to tell him it's about 50 feet aft of where he's aiming. Lion 100 comes in a third time. This time hits the number 3 wire. The sweet spot, stops, taxis over. We go to do our post-flight with the air crew. That pilot knows we're all looking at him. He knows we all watched him miss the wires. Twice. We're not going to say anything, but we're looking at him. He gets out of the jet, talks to the guys about anything he needs to report for the jet. We're all keeping our mouths shut, but we're side-eyeing him. We're looking at each other. We're laughing. We know we're going to be roasting him as soon as he and the rear seater are gone. And that's when Chief Frazier walks up. By now, all the aircraft have landed. Engines are shutting down so we can start hearing easier. Chief Frazier walks up and asks the aircrew, so, did you graduate flight school yet? And we all just stop, and the aircrew looks at the chief because I just want to let you know, the arresting wire is actually further back than you were aiming, so just in case you hadn't seen it before, it's this long cable stretched across the deck. That's what you want to hit. The flight deck is a dangerous place to work. The mechanical ballet performed up there every day by United States Navy Airedales walks a fine edge of risk to personal injury and risk to property damage, equipment damage. But it's also a very funny place to work sometimes. Most of the time, very rarely does the entire flight deck, does the entire air wing, even the ship, go after one person. To do something to earn that level of ridicule, you've got to do something really boneheaded in public, like, oh, I don't know, running flat out, tripping over a tie-down chain and flying through the air till you belly flop on the flight deck. Most of the time, though, we keep our ridicule and teasing to just within our own squadrons. But even with that said, if you don't want to be the object of ridicule at all on the roof of an aircraft carrier, there's a few things to do. One, don't run and look where you're going. Trust me, it helps. Number 2, regularly replace that little water-soluble tablet in your float coat's water-activated inflation device. And number 3, specifically for our pilots, keep an eye out for the arresting gear. Those of us, the junior enlisted, the E6 and below sailors, we probably are not going to say anything to you if you miss all 4 wires, even if you do it twice. But the chief will say something to you because it's an old saying in the Navy, don't mess with the chief.